welcome to Booktopia.
Thank you for having me.
You produced the Australian story on Jock, and why did you not want to just leave it at that? Why did you want to write a book about his case?
This certainly has been a case that's got under my skin. The case wasn't finished. There were still unanswered questions, I felt. I wanted to get to the bottom of it. In a sense, I wanted to finally crack whodunit in a very traditional murder mystery way of looking at things. But I'd also got to know the Polframans, the extraordinary relationship between the father and son in this situation. I wanted to see where that would play out, and I wanted to get far more of an idea of how the Bulgarians involved, how they felt about things and how they saw it. And I was never going to be able to do that if I just sat back here in Australia and didn't go back and go back and go back, and that's what I did.
Okay, so now talking about going back, let's go back to the beginning. What is Jock's story in a nutshell? What happened to him?
In a nutshell, Jock was 19, travelling the world, taking leave from Australia on a gap year, if you like, which extended for several years. And several days after Christmas in 2007, when he'd just turned 21, he was still doing this travelling thing, and he went back to Bulgaria where he'd made good friends and indeed had fallen in love and things like that. On the night, or in the early hours of the 28th of December 2007, Jock says he saw a young gypsy being attacked by a group of some 15 people he thought were soccer hooligans. Certainly they were young men, young Bulgarians, and he rushed, he says, to the assistance of that gypsy or Roma, and in the ensuing melee a young Bulgarian died, a young Bulgarian called Andrei Monov, who was a 20-year-old law student, and the rest is history. Indeed. A court case ensued in which vital evidence, potential evidence, went missing, and in which witnesses who were friends of the dead young man were allowed to contradict themselves, and the defence had no capacity to contest it, and in which a great many other things that take us to the heart of how Bulgaria fares at the moment and the problems this post-communist country has as it grapples with a capitalist economy, and it grapples with things like mafia, corruption. And for me, that was just about as fascinating as the story of Jock Polframan, who was he, what happened that night, and the relationship between all the different people involved. It was this, like a Russian novel, intriguing set of little sub-stories that I discovered were swirling around the wider court case and the hearings that dragged on over a year and a half.
How did you navigate Bulgaria, given that you don't speak the language and it meant that you had to trust people to interpret for you in a country that, as you say, has been kind of turned inside out and where there is an extraordinary level of corruption? How did you know who to trust?
That was a really difficult thing, and it took me some time to find a young Bulgarian journalist, a woman called Boriana Tsambazova, who, after speaking to many different people, I decided I could trust. Of course, it's a gamble. How can one possibly know? As any foreign correspondent will tell you, you arrive in a country and you're parachuting in. You need to find people in that country who can be your eyes and ears, who can interpret different cultural mores, who can also translate for you, and who in this situation, who I could trust with the incredibly sensitive material that I was being given by all sides of this case. Now, Boriana, as I say, is a young journalist and is someone who over several years I developed a friendship with, as well as a working relationship. She's a brave, very talented reporter with a huge future, I hope, ahead of her. Perhaps not in Bulgaria, because their press freedom is very limited, but she'll find a future somewhere. She's so talented, and in the end she was invaluable, and I couldn't have done it without her.
What about Jock? What's your impression of him, having met him, having got to know him since he's been in jail? What do you think of this young man? How would you describe him?
Jock is a charismatic fellow. He's vibrant, he's full of life, he's got an extraordinary general knowledge, he's very argumentative, and I have to say we had almost shouting matches frequently about the state of the world, about history, about politics, about something he'd been reading. He likes to talk about things that have nothing to do with his case. He's someone who I believe has always been, but certainly still is, despite 5 years in prison, 6 years in prison, he's someone who's very engaged with the world around him.
I get the impression of an idealist.
Well, I don't know that he would call himself an idealist, but I possibly would do. He's somebody who, I think from his time at a Catholic school in Sydney called Riverview, I think from his family, has a very strong and developed sense of social justice and of his role within that we all must act. If we see something going on, we should all act. That to sit back and do nothing is immoral. Now, I find those very worthy sentiments. I think that what we can always debate is how you go about acting, what you do, when you do it. And of course, in this situation, if his version of events is to be believed, acting had a terrible outcome. It may have had a terrible outcome anyway, but he's living with the aftermath.
And not only he is living with it, other people are living with it. I think one of the things about your book that's very striking is that you paint a very empathetic portrait of his father, and his father comes across as someone very quiet, someone introverted, someone not suited to the public glare at all, who has had to overcome his own personality and reservations about crusading for his son to become his son's principal champion. Can you just say a little bit about Jock's father?
Jock's father, Simon, is a doctor by training, a pathologist by practice. His world is really all about looking down a microscope. My sense is that he has always been a private person, a quieter person, a very studious person. He was, top of his class in Latin and ancient Greek. He would like to go to the theatre or to the opera as a night out as a university student, rather than what many young men might want to do. So in that sense, he couldn't be more different from Jock, this larger-than-life, avuncular, motorcycle riding, long-haired, big-bearded, rugby-playing, rowing young man. However, they do share a common sensibility when it comes to doing the right thing. They go about it in a slightly different way. Jock now says that his father has become a hero to him. Jock says that he doesn't believe heroes are just born, you have to work at it, and that his father, he could never have imagined standing in front of a barrage of cameras, of making public pronouncements. He never thought his father could do such a thing, and yet he has. He has out of necessity. And I think Simon would say he has because although he spent a long time doubting his son, not quite feeling his son's story always made sense, he came to the point, after studying all the evidence, of believing his son. And while he, I think, might have hoped his son would do things differently, and while they argue about strategy and things like that, he's come to admire his son. And that's a very extraordinary thing.
One particular forensic expert in Bulgaria, a very brave woman scientist, has challenged the evidence and disputes the fact that the knife that was in Jock's possession could have made the wound in the victim.
Yes, this woman, whose name is Professor Maria Grozova, indeed is courageous. What I discovered as I investigated this is that the world of forensic science in Bulgaria is riven with huge amounts of internal conflict. The forensic doctor in charge of the autopsy, for example, on the young man who died, was charged with body parts stealing. Was charged with stealing body parts in a wider scandal that rocked different parts of Eastern Europe, but in particular Bulgaria. So there's a lot that's problematic in that area in Bulgaria. Now, she suspected early on, after looking at the autopsy results, that the knife, which Jock always said he carried, a butterfly knife with a blade of some 12.3 centimetres, that it's a single-edged knife, and yet the wound on the victim suggested a double-edged knife. Caroline, at the end of the day, I think what's important in all the questions raised about the forensic evidence is that the forensic material given to the court is not conclusive. And in a court, many courts, that would work in the defence's favour. So there were none of Jock's fingerprints on the knife that's said to be his. There was none of his DNA. The forensic doctor in charge of the autopsy, who talked to the court, addressed the court, gave evidence to the court, that doctor said that the wound had been caused with a strong thrust. Now, forensic doctors I've spoken to suggest that in that event, and certainly the Bulgarian one who raised the question said this, in that event you'd expect to see a little bit of DNA around the hilt of the knife. For my money, the evidence that's most interesting is not the forensic evidence. I think it raises lots of questions, but it provides no answer. The evidence that's most compelling is the CCTV footage, which did not go missing, because your viewers might not be aware, but bizarrely, in the days after this crime happened, very critical, potentially very critical CCTV went missing from out the front of a government building. But there was traffic recordings. There were traffic recordings that were collected and kept. And at the very end of my investigation, finally, I got access to this material, which the defence had been given very little access to. And that material, hazy, blurred as it was, gave me a very good picture of the sequence of events. And when I saw it, I thought, now I'm getting to the bottom